I'm switching to English. My name is Zarema. I'm an activist for Feminist anti-war resistance and World Congress of Dagestan. So my subject today is colonial system of Russia in the context of the war with Ukraine. So the war between Russia and Ukraine has exposed underlying patterns of colonial exploitation within the Russian Federation. Central to this issue, how Russia disproportionately consumes its indigenous regions, mobilize our population for war, and internalize poverty and marginalization. These practices reflect continuation of historical colonial policies and phasing the unequal relationship between Moscow and periphery. The Vancouver Declaration of SC, adopted the annual session held from June 30 to July 4 in 2023, states that Russia engaged in the violent and deliberate subjugation of indigenous people and ethnic minorities, denying them equal rights and self-determination, which continues a violation of Helsinki Principles and UN Chapter. I don't hear the translation. The war as a reflection of the colonial policies. The war in Ukraine has highlighted how these systemic issues serve Russian imperial ambition. Resource extraction, indigenous regions supply not only for the natural resources, but also human resources for the military. Strategic neglect. By keeping this region poor and divided, Moscow reduced the likelihood and organized resistance. Cultural erasure, mobilization, and military deaths disproportionately affects indigenous communities, accelerating cultural and demographic decline. The economical exploitation, the deployment of teachers, doctors, and builders to occupied territories demonstrates how economic deprivation is used to sustain Russian geopolitical aims. The war as a reflection of the colonial policies. The war in Ukraine has highlighted how these systemic issues serve Russian imperial ambition. Resource extraction, indigenous regions supply not only for the natural resources, but also human resources for the military. Strategic neglect. By keeping this region poor and divided, Moscow reduced the likelihood and organized resistance. Cultural erasure, mobilization, and military deaths disproportionately affects indigenous communities, accelerating cultural and demographic decline. The economical exploitation, the deployment of teachers, doctors, and builders to occupied territories demonstrates how economic deprivation is used to sustain Russian geopolitical aims. Labor deployment. Due to systemic poverty, resistance from economically disadvantaged regions are often compelled to work in Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine. The Russian government has actively recruited teachers, doctors, and construction workers from these areas to serve in occupied regions, offering financial incentives that are hard to refuse in given the lack of opportunities in home. So basically, when Russia is hiring people to work in occupied regions, our people, it's tempting to our people because our regions are poor and this kind of salary is so high. So some of people are going to dangerous territories and working for occupied territories. For example, in Russian Health Ministry has offered substantial bonuses to medical professions willing to work in occupied Ukrainian regions, with some programs promising payment up to 2 million rubles. It's approximately 19,000 euro. Historical context. This pattern mirrors Soviet Union practices during World War II, where ethnic minorities were often overpressed in frontline roles. Exploitation of indigenous regions. Indigenous regions in Russia, such as Buryatia, Sakha, and North Caucasus, have historically been sites of resource extraction and neglect. Despite being rich in natural resources, this region have little reinvestment, leaving their population with inadequate infrastructure, healthcare and education. Economic marginalization. Many indigenous people areas contribute significantly to Russian gross domestic product through oil, gas, and minerals, yet they remain some of the poorest regions. Sakha Republic produces a large share of Russian diamonds, but most of the wealth flows to Moscow. In the North Caucasus, abundance of natural resources like oil, gas are extracted, but the region suffers from high unemployment and underdevelopment, with poverty rates far above a national average. Material support for occupied territories. Regions like Dagestan in North Caucasus have been reported to send substantial aid to Russian occupied territories in Ukraine. And for example, it was since the war started, the agricultural producers and processors in Dagestan have sent about 200 tons of food supply to Russian newly occupied regions. The humanitarian aid includes 50 tons of rice, 40 tons of flour, 40 tons of mineral water, 25 tons of non-alcoholic beverage, 10 tons of potatoes, and so on. So basically the poorest region on the north sending supplies to Ukraine. We are poor. People do not have a work. People living mostly on mountains and having farming, and they sending 200 tons to occupied territories. Further contribution in August 19 in 2024, the Dagestan Charity Foundation Pure Heart sent 20 tons of humanitarian aid to the Kursk region. Subsidized regions of the North Caucasus. The North Caucasus Republic, including Dagestan, Chechnya, and Ingushetia, are among the most heavily subsidized regions in the Russian Federation. These areas rely almost entirely on the federal budget transfers to sustain their economies. In Dagestan in 2021, federal subsidies covered approximately 74% of the regional budget. Chechnya federal transfers accounted for nearly 82% of its budget, highlighting its fiscal dependence. In Ingushetia, this region is actually the smallest one, even more dependent of the federal subsidies, and like 85% of its budget. The substantial financial support underscores the region's lack of economic sufficiency, reinforcing their reliance on Moscow for funding and governance. So basically, all of my life I'm hearing this narrative like stop feeding Caucasus. So basically Russian people says that we are feeding Caucasus, and even it's translated mostly through the TV, and politicals are also saying the same thing. So basically this is our товарищ Жириновский. Это не слышно было, да?
Если ты сделаешь максимально громкость, то может быть. Ну, час. Давай.
Ну ладно.
Нет, это через...
Через кого?
Это
ну, тут,
можно
в принципе,
подключить
тут все понятно, завалили Кавказ, и Казань деньгами. Whatever. It's okay.
Пошли.
Mobilization of indigenous population. Russia's mobilization for the war in Ukraine has disproportionately targeted indigenous population. This strategy minimizes dissent in urban, ethnically Russian areas and shifts the human cost of the war to marginalized groups. Statistical evidence of disproportionate mobilization. According to available reports, Buryatia, with population approximately near 1 million people, saw over 6,000 of individuals by late 2022 sent to the war to Ukraine. This is is highest rates per capita in the country. The North Caucasus including regions like Dagestan and Chechnya, has also been heavily mobilized. In Dagestan, protests erupted in September 2022 against a disproportionate conscription of local men, highlighting a widespread resentment towards Moscow policy. In contrast, weather and predominantly ethnic Russian regions like Moscow and St. Petersburg experienced far-feeding. This is not our war. In September 2022, protests against mobilization erupted in Dagestan in the Russian North Caucasus. Over 100 people were arrested during the protest in the region capital of Makhachkala, over the info an independent Russian humanitarian rights monitor said. In Yakutsk, the capital of Republic Sakha, several hundred women protested against the mobilization in September 25 of year 2022. Despite the peaceful protest, which took the form of ritual dance and prayer, the Sakha people, the police arrested 24 women. So basically, the peaceful protest, okay, 24 people, and this is basically the video from protest of Makhachkala. Yeah, this is on the video. Basically, a lot of people stood against of the war in Ukraine, and it's even finished by the shooting from the police. System of poverty and marginalization. The ongoing colonial policies reinforce systemic poverty and keep indigenous regions politically weak and economically dependent on Moscow. Living standards. In regions like Tuva, the poverty rates over 30% compared to less than 10% in Moscow. The North Caucasus, despite its natural wealth, remains of the poorest region in Russia. In Ingushetia and Chechnya, unemployment rates are among the highest in the country. Access to quality healthcare and education is limited. Same basically in the rest of Caucasus. It's just highlighting the most. Practical marginalization. Local government has limited autonomy with policies dictated by the central government. Indigenous people face barriers to political representation and cultural preservation. Basically, in the 2006, they cancelled free votes for regional presidents and representatives. Now, everyone is sent from the Kremlin. Basically, the people who are the more loyal to the more loyal to the Kremlin are sent like representative of our regions. In the North Caucasus, Moscow's heavily handed approach to governance has shifted regional autonomy, with leaders often appointed directly by the Kremlin rather than elected by the local population. Basically, since 2006, we don't have the right to elect and choose our own leaders. Everyone sent from the Kremlin. The conclusion of the presentation in the advantages of decolonizing Russia. The first of all is empowerment of indigenous regions, restoring autonomy and self-governance to indigenous and marginalized regions, ensure cultural preservation and economic self-determination. The second one is political and economic diversity. Decolonization promotes the more localized governance, fostering innovation, economic diversification, and reducing dependence on centralized systems. The third one is right and justice. Acknowledging and addressing historical injustice creates pathway for recognition and equitable representation for all communities. The fourth one is the global stability, is the most. Decentralization can reduce internal and external conflicts, fostering peaceful international relationship and cooperation. The cultural flourishing, decolonization, revitalize languages, traditions, and arts, and enriching the global cultural landscape. So basically now we don't have a right to promote our languages, save our cultures, because the Moscow trying to Russifize everyone, trying to demolish our languages, even in school. For example, when I was studying in 2002 in Makhachkala, we had only one class in a week with my native language. It was basically like faculty language. It's not like the main language I could study. It follows that decolonization of Russia is the path towards restoring justice, fostering regional development, protecting the rights of indigenous people, and building a state founded on the principles of genuine democracy, free from imperial ambitions, xenophobia, and racism. Thank you for your attention.
Значит, можно вопросы задавать или сразу воркшоп? Скажи. Any questions?
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we are limited in time, so...
Yeah, we will have a workshop after this, but now we can have a discussion about the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is of course attempt of, partly it has already happening with colonizing Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so how these relations of different kinds of colonial spaces in Russia are being worked by the government to maintain its power.
Basically, we don't have a right to resist. For example, if we're resisting for our rights in region, because they are canceling everything like the free election, the choosing our own people that we want to choose. Everyone who's standing for the rights, for example, or trying to do something to, for example, prosperize the republic and trying to stay a little bit independent, at least a little bit independent, they're facing repressions, and mostly it's extremism. Like they arresting people and they putting this extremist label on us. So terrorists or extremists. The mostly in North Caucasus we are terrorists, and they try to manipulate by the name of the terrorism because we are Muslim region, and they playing on that. That's you know. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you have some actions towards ending, like some sort of work groups in Finland or in the regions? Like, is there something concrete right now?
The concrete happening right now is like the people who are working for decolonization, they are promoting and highlighting our problems in the worldwide area, and also it's being impossible before the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is just highlighting all of our relationship that we had before. So before people tried to do something, and basically they were forcing people to leave, like under repressions. So the people who were standing for the regions before are left, and they trying to work out from the abroad. And now we are the people who trying to highlight our problems through decolonization in other regions also, like my coworker from Sakha.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I continue the question? Like, how about activities in Finland now? Are you, as a group, is there some activities in Finland?
Today we are here. So also we tried, for example, collaborate with the Amnesty International and also with A-ryhmä. Yeah. And in Amnesty International we had the latest evening for political prisoners in Russia, indigenous people, and I was highlighting the point of repressions, like why we are political prisoners and what kind of repression the mostly we have. So we're trying, yeah. Thank you.
I can also answer that. I'm also living in Finland, but in Mikkeli, so I don't know any activities or I don't know anybody in Finland actually, because I'm also working in different countries. So I went to UN in Geneva and I attend like seminars in Europe and stuff. So if you have like contacts and stuff, I would be very glad to receive it.
Yeah. Basically the same. Any other question? So we're continuing then to the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all the questions.
Thank you for the questions. And if you're interested, there is also manifests of feminist anti-war resistance. Thank you.
Yeah.